My name is Patrick Frascogna. I'm legal counsel to James Penniston and John Burroughs, both of whom proudly and passionately served our country in the United States Air Force. Mr. Burroughs and Mr. Penniston are seated with me this morning, along with Nick Pope, formerly with the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense. Mr. Pope has been a long-time advocate for full disclosure of the events for which we will discuss today. For me, it is indeed nothing short of an honor to be seated beside these gentlemen. 33 years ago, at the zenith of the Cold War in 1980, Staff Sergeant James Penniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs were assigned to the twin Royal Air Force bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge near Suffolk, England. At that time, RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge were leased by the United Kingdom to the U.S. Air Force. Together, the twin bases were home to the largest tactical fighter wing in existence anywhere in the world at that time. James Penniston held as U.S. as well as NATO security clearances and was responsible for the protection of sophisticated war-making assets, in addition to the personnel located at the bases. By December of 1980, he was the senior security officer in charge of base security at the twin base facility. After midnight on December 26, 1980, Airmen Burroughs, along with Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens, were on patrol together when they noticed strange lights emanating from just outside the east gate of the Bentwaters base in the adjacent Rendlesham Forest. Mr. Burroughs had been stationed at the twin base facility for nearly 2 years and had never seen such an unusual phenomenon previously in the forest. Sergeant Steffens and Airman Burroughs telephoned Central Security Control, CSC, from the kiosk at the east gate to report the unidentified lights just beyond the base's perimeter. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Penniston was briefed by Staff Sergeant Steffens regarding the strange lights that they had seen. Mr. Penniston was further informed that the lights did not result from a crash, but had landed in the forest. This is a remark he discounted by Sergeant Steffens and proceeded to notify the base control center that there was instead a possible downed aircraft. Mr. Penniston also learned that an object had been seen on radar over Rendlesham Forest. Moreover, a call came over his radio that Eastern Radar had also confirmed an object that disappeared from their screens over the forest. The team Mr. Penniston assembled to investigate the lights in the forest consisted of himself, Airman Burroughs, and Airman Ed Kabancic. As he and the rest of the team approached the forest, they experienced uncharacteristic problems with their radios. As a result, Mr. Penniston instructed Airman Kabancic to remain at the edge of the forest to act as a relay for transmissions between he and Mr. Burroughs as they entered the forest themselves. As these two gentlemen proceeded into the forest, they were expecting to find a downed aircraft. Upon arriving at the suspected crash site, it immediately became apparent to both Penniston and Burroughs that they were not looking at a crashed aerial vehicle, or for that matter, any kind of vehicle they had ever seen. Suddenly, a blinding flash of white light emanated from that craft, instinctively causing Mr. Penniston and Burroughs to drop to the ground. As both men returned to their feet, they witnessed a triangular craft approximately 9 feet long by 6.5 feet wide at rest in a small clearing in the forest. Also observed were blue and yellow lights swirling around the exterior skin of the craft as if they were part of the craft's skin itself. The air in the vicinity of the craft felt electrically charged and was in fact so full of static electricity they could feel it all over their clothes, skin, and throughout their hair. Nothing, absolutely nothing in the military training of these men had prepared them for this encounter. After perhaps 10 minutes had passed without any recognizable aggression displayed by the craft, Mr. Penniston concluded there was no threat to either himself or Mr. Burroughs and the rest of his response team, or, more importantly, to the Bentwaters base itself. Consequently, he commenced a thorough on-site inspection of the craft in accordance with the usual security protocols. His inspection of the craft included photographs, notebook entries, and radio contact with Airman Kabancic for relay back to the Bentwaters Control Center. Mr. Penniston noted a row of symbols which was 2.5 feet long and about 3 inches in height. on one side of the craft. The symbols Mr. Penniston saw were pictorial and hieroglyphic-like in design, the largest one being a triangle which was centered in the middle of others. All of the symbols were etched into the skin of the craft, which was itself warm to the touch and smooth as glass. Approximately 45 minutes after arriving on scene with the craft, it rapidly began to brighten. In response, both Penniston and Burroughs took defensive positions away from it and watched as the craft became airborne without generating any air or sound disturbance. The craft maneuvered through the trees as it ascended skyward, then streaked away at an unbelievable rate of speed. In fact, Mr. Penniston described the craft's departure speed in his field notes as impossible. The craft's departure from the forest was observed not only by Mr. Penniston and Burroughs, but by more than 40 Air Force personnel, all of whom were trained observers assigned to the 81st Security Police Squadron. The information acquired during Penniston and Burroughs' investigation in the forest was dutifully reported by them through normal military channels. Their team and other personnel who witnessed the craft were instructed to treat the investigation as top secret and not to discuss what they had seen. The camera film containing photographs of the craft Mr. Penniston took were turned into the base lab, but when he picked them up, they were strangely all overexposed, rendering them useless. Add to this oddity that following the encounter in the forest, both Penniston and Burroughs were interrogated by government agents believed to be from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, in which narcotics were even given them prior to interrogation as if they were some kind of enemy captives. The previous description of the encounter Jim Penniston and John Burroughs had in Rendlesham Forest in late December of 1980 was not solitary. John Burroughs would join Colonel Charles Halt on another investigation into the forest 2 nights subsequent, when an illuminated craft moved silently through the forest before becoming multiple aerial objects overhead. Colonel Halt generated an official Air Force memorandum commonly referred to as the Halt Memo, in which he memorializes this event. Moreover, the colonel has even stood in this very room we're in today and said he believed the objects were under intelligent control.